Hey everyone, it's about 2:40 p.m. on this Monday afternoon, October 13th, 2025, here on the West Coast. And I haven't done one of these in a while. Actually, I haven't done, something X-Men related when it comes to X-Men 97 in quite a while, at least about 2 months, I should say. But of course, we had New York Comic Con, hashtag NYCC 25, this past weekend. And a lot of news, came out from, the NYCC. A lot of news, as far as like the MCU and mostly with the X-Men and such, all came out. A lot of stuff came out. The trailer for season 2 was leaked online. Some people took some video and posted it. Excuse me, posted it online. On social media like Twitter, aka X, Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube. I'm sure other outlets, like Rumble and Odyssey and VENMO, just to make sure, they have one outlet, available to, to be watched or to see the leaked trailer on. And I did see it. I did see it myself, and I thought it looked really good. And it does kind of connect to a lot of the information we got beforehand and basically afterwards, because a lot is being talked about as far as the X-Men go. I mean, the X-Men were pretty much a focal point, report-wise, before and after and around New York Comic Con time. So that's what I'm here to talk about. I want to give my thoughts on it, mostly starting with X-Men 97. And basically, this came out a couple of weeks ago, but one of the voice of Charles Xavier and the voice for Apocalypse this upcoming season. Actually, he was the voice at the end of last season. But the Ross Marquand, I'm sorry if I pronounced that last name wrong, Ross Marquand, who is the voice of Apocalypse. Like I said, he voiced him at the end last year in the finale for season 1, and he also voices Charles Xavier. Going to be doing double duty in season 2. But basically, this is what he said back on, and this was reported back on September 26th. A lot of people were talking about this and everything. A lot of people were talking about this. And basically what Ross says is, quote, season 2 will be very dark. He says, I'm amazed Disney greenlit it because it's so dark a lot of people die. And that's via Collider.com, an interview he did there. And then other outlets, basically acknowledge, if not cite, Collider as well, because it's an interview that Ross did with them. And again, he says, and I quote, a lot of people die, and he says, again, and I quote, I'm amazed that Disney greenlit it because it's so dark. It's very, very dark. A lot of people die, and so many people don't talk about it, just being honest. So yeah, that's all he could say. He can't say too much because, of course, NDAs. But basically, being someone that worked on the show, voicing, several characters, two main characters in this case, basically, him coming out and saying that he was surprised Disney greenlit it to be shown on Disney Plus next year, because we did get confirmation that next year it's going to be coming out, mainly around the summer. For him to say that he was kind of surprised, you might think, oh, he's just hyping it up, he's just messing with people and everything. That might be true, but I think there is a genuineness to, to his answer or to what he had to say in this interview with Collider. And when you have somebody voicing main characters of any animated show, whether it's a long time coming, soft rebooted continuation of an OG series that it's continuing off of, or it's something new, a new take, and all that. When you have a voice actor or actress come out in an interview, and even though they can't say much, if you will, as to what's going to happen, let's say plot-wise or with certain characters, but they can kind of hint at what could happen, or kind of mention how maybe the surprise, certain things were allowed, and you hear that coming directly from their own voice or their own words, then yeah, that to me is something you need to take, take very seriously and into consideration. So for him to come out and say that, yeah, they were surprised. And this, again, is the voice actor of our main antagonist in season 2, Apocalypse, and he's the new voice of Charles Xavier. When you hear him come out and say, "Hey, I was surprised Disney let this, pass. I'm surprised they greenlit it as a go because it's very, very dark and a lot of people die." You know, when you hear one of the voices for the lead characters, the lead antagonist, if you will, the lead antagonist and the pretty much the lead protagonist, if you will, coming out and saying that, it's really quite, something. It's really quite, surprising. But like I said, it's something you should really, think about and consider. Um, anyway, basically they do talk about other things, touch upon other things with X-Men as well. I'm gonna get to it right now. I'm going through my phone, make sure I find it. They did allude, according to Marvel updates, whether you believe it or not, and this is courtesy of Daniel RPK, and this is back on the 27th of last month. They do state, according to what they've heard on the Marvel updates, Marvel Studios' main plans for the next saga of the MCU, basically the phases that take place after Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars, and everything in between. Basically, they're stating that their main prerogative when it comes to, let's say, the big bads for the next phase of the MCU, and again, this is after Doomsday and Secret Wars and all that. They said the main protagonist, since it's going to be more mutant focused, more X-Men focused, if you will, because there is word that the X-Men are going to be like the primary focus of this new phase of the MCU, this softly rebooted phase of the MCU, which will basically be like what? I think we had phase 3, phase 4, phase 5. We're going into phase 6, right? We're going into phase 6, which concludes Secret Wars, and then phase 7 and 8. So the next phases after that, phase 7, 8, and 9, are going to be what people have slowly dubbed or kind of nicknamed the Mutant Saga. According to Marvel updates, you're going to have the main plans, according to what they're understanding from Marvel Studios for the MCU, will reportedly revolve around Mr. Sinister and Apocalypse. So we can assume Mr. Sinister will be like the big bad heading into the first X-Men Avengers team up film, if you will, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be Avengers, slash X-Men. That's going to be the team up film, if you will. That's basically going to be the Avenger film for that phase. Pretty much it sounds like that's going to center around, or at least revolve around Sinister, and in that movie, that Avengers X-Men film will lead us into the next couple of phases and all that, which would be 8 and 9, and then that's going to conclude with Apocalypse. At least that's what we're understanding. Well, at least I'm understanding. But yeah, according to some news, according to Marvel updates, back on the 27th of September, and Daniel RPK, Marvel Studios' main plans for the next saga of the MCU reportedly revolve around Mr. Sinister and Apocalypse. So right now, Doctor Doom, and we can assume the Beyonder, are going to be like the main ones for, Doomsday and Secret Wars. And then later on, after that, as we get into the more mutant focus, as I mentioned, the X-Men focused one, it's going to focus on Sinister and Apocalypse. Sinister, the first big bad, and then that's going to lead into Apocalypse, from what I can understand, or from what I can tell. And everybody else is talking about it too, according to Cosmic Marvel. They talked about it on the 28th, and everything. So just and even MCU Film News talked about this as well. And they even put in more descriptions. I'm going to find it again on the other one. Yeah. MCU Film News even says that, again, Marvel Studios is reportedly planning the next MCU saga around X-Men villains Sinister and Apocalypse. And both this one and the Cosmic Marvel say that they do have a couple of names in mind for the villains, actor-wise. With that said, as I'm fast-forwarding here, we did get information that, at the New York Comic Cons, we're getting more into that now. I'm going to, like I say, try to fast-forward here as I'm doing this. but we did get information at New York Comic Con during the during the X Men panels and all that. We found out that Rogue is going to get a new comic in the beginning of next year. Rogue's going to get a new comic, so for anybody that's wondering, hey, is she going to leave the X Men and all that, and be with Magneto, which we'll talk about in a little bit too, like they teased pretty much, towards the end of last season. I don't think you have to worry about that because she's too vital of a character, too popular of a character when it comes to X Men, and also she's being set up, in my opinion, to be like the next leader. That's just my take, on it. That's just my take, on it. Sorry about that. I had to sneeze. I didn't want you guys to hear that. But anyways, I'm going through the news here and everything, going through some of the news on my Twitter feed. I like to repost some stuff that I'm a fan of. So let's go to here and see. Just making sure. I'm trying to get there. Trying to get there. Oh, I reposted a lot of stuff, honestly. Now I'm looking at it. But I'm trying to get there. Trying to get there. But yeah, basically one of the reports was, and I think it's coming up real soon here that I reposted. Rogue is going to get her own comic book series, another comic book solo run, if you will, real soon. Okay, so Marvel Leaks 22, or at Marvel Leaks 22, 5 days ago, leaked out this image. I'll put it up on the screen if I can. Basically, what looks like to be the main characters that'll be focused on in season two, or at least be focused on, in the process of helping. So of course we have Forge and Bishop, which have been pretty much hinted at the end of last season as they're going back in time or going through time to, find all the X-Men. Then you got Iceman, Shadowcat, Kitty Pryde, Colossus, Emma Frost. We can assume she's gonna turn good in this upcoming season, because she's the main part of the X-Men in the comics. Havoc, unbeknownst to Cyclops, Scott Summers, in this incarnation of X-Men, the animated series, Havoc is his brother, but he doesn't know that yet. Then we have Magic's Colossus' sister, Ariana, who made a cameo when morphed into her and everything, but then got taken over by some kind of force and everything that made him basically go all full-fledged dark magica and all that. Then we have Exodus and Dust being the other ones as well. Dust is a mutant that can turn into little sand. So them being in the desert basically brings her into the picture, if you will. Now, like I said, Rogue, she's going to get her own comic. They do announce that she's going to appear in X-Men, in Avengers, I should say. She'll appear in Avengers Doomsday. Right now, they're saying that the actress that did Rogue in the original movies will not be back as her. We could assume it might be the other actress that was her in the latter films, or they might be just trying to throw us off, and it is Anna Paquette that's coming back. Okay, so moving on here, continuing and looking here. Hold on, see if I can find what I'm looking for here. Hold on. Okay, here it is. It says this is 3 days ago, and this is at the X-Men update on Twitter, or on X. And it says a brand new Rogue series has been announced, set to release in January 2026. And basically, the cover looks really nice. The cover for the first issue looks really nice. It's got Rogue in her classic '90s X-Men outfit, but it also has a picture of her back when she first became Rogue. Basically, when she first discovered her powers, has Mystique in the background, and then another character as well. But yeah, we're getting a new Rogue series. I'm looking forward to that. In fact, I'm going to want to get my hands on that. Rogue's one of my favorites. I do have several issues of the more, well, I wouldn't say recent one, but it was a Rogue series that came out in about the 2000s, 2010s, if you will. I got my hands on that, as well as I got my hands on some of the other Rogue comics that came out in the 90s and everything as well. So we got that coming. They also talk about Marvel Comics Twitter page, X page, or account. They say that enter the shadows of tomorrow, the next era of Marvel's X-Men storytelling is also going to be happening, if not happening already. But yeah, it's called Enter the Shadows of Tomorrow. So that looks pretty good. Well, looks interesting, I should say. And okay, alright, so basically a day ago or 2 days ago, they showed the first look at the X-Men 97 Season 2 trailer. I'm not going to show it. I don't want to get in trouble or anything, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But that was shown at New York Comic Con, hashtag NYCC. And then, here's another one from X-Men Updates a day ago. They said X-Men 97 pipeline schedule for the next few seasons, for the next few seasons. X-Men 97 pipeline schedule for the next few seasons. And basically, this is how they have it. And I'll hopefully pop that up here so you can see it. They have Season 2 set to debut in summer of next year. Season 3 animatics on the way, basically the work in progress stuff. And Season 4 and 5 for X-Men 97 is in early development. So what that means by being in early development is they're discussing, some potential ideas as to, what they can adapt, into X-Men 97, as well as try to basically create as original content for X-Men 97. Then, a day ago, and this is according to the X-Men Updates account on Twitter, aka X, they said that Brad Wenderberg, who's one of the people behind Season 2, 3, and potentially 4 and 5, Brad Wenderberg says they are currently discussing X-Men 97 Season 4 and 5. New seasons will drop every year starting in 2026. And this is an interview that Brad Wenderberg did with Collider. But so yeah, basically the plan, if things go well, because again they are discussing Season 4 and 5, basically coming up, like I said, with potential ideas and scenarios to make those seasons really interesting. The plan starting next summer of next year, is for new seasons to drop every year. So basically, what they're saying is that since they have the animatics for Season 3 already on the way, that will drop in 2027. And if things go as according to plan, Season 4 will be in 2028, and Season 5 in 2029. Basically 2029. So Season 2, 2026, Season 3, 2027, and again, like I said, if things go according to plan, 2028 will have Season 4, and 2029 will have Season 5. So that's pretty cool. But they do go on to talk about some more stuff here, if I bring it up. Yeah, he also talked about in the interview with Collider, Brad Wenderberg says, and this is the interview, I'm just going off some of the experts, some of the cliff notes that they, Marvel Updates and X-Men Updates on Twitter, aka X, put on their account for people to read and share and repost. But Brad Wenderberg says for the next season, they will, and I quote, this is what Brad Wenderberg says in the interview with Collider. He says, "There is a lot of romance in X-Men 97 Season 2. Well, Rogue and Magneto are stuck in the past together. They're kind of our past team, and Scott and Jean are seen in the future along with Storm and Forge. So Storm and Forge basically are going to be the team of the present, along with Wolverine. That's basically what he's alluding to, according to what some people are also talking about when it comes to this season. But yeah, this is what, again, he said. This is what he said in his interview with Collider. He said, quote, well, Rogue and Magneto are stuck in the past together. They're kind of our past team. Scott and Jean are in the future, along with Storm and Forge. Now, Storm and Forge could be in the future with them, or at least join them in the future by trying to find them, or they'll be in the present. Because basically the idea, the idea to, fight, basically the idea, I'm trying to find the right word to say, the idea for them, storyline-wise, what some people are looking at, is that, they'll go, and people are discussing here on YouTube as well, is that you're going to have Apocalypse as our main antagonist, right? For Season 2. And the idea is that he is immortal. He basically exists across all time, right? He's basically unkillable. So the idea is you're going to have, the X-Men team in the past, that being Rogue, Magneto, Beast, and Professor X, along with some other people that might have some mutant powers as well. You're going to have them fight Apocalypse. They're going to have him fight Apocalypse, as he's known currently at that time as Ab Sabanur. They're going to have them fight him, and then at the same time, you're going to have, the present team, that being of like Storm, Forge, Wolverine, Sunspot, Jubilee, and some of the other characters I listed, like maybe Iceman, Kitty Pryde, Shadowcat, if you will. You're going to have them fighting, along with maybe Colossus and Magic and all that. You're going to have them fighting in the present, against Apocalypse. So you're going to have a team, an X-Men team, maybe an X-Men team, an X-Men / X-Factor team up, if you will, against against Apocalypse. And one of the things I will point out in the trailer is it shows Storm wearing what looks like to be an X-Factor uniform. So you got to imagine that when things, ended the way they did in the season 1 finale, that maybe she got, blasted to a point to where she's now part of X-Factor with no memory of being part of the X-Men, but that memory will probably come back in season 2. That's my assumption. I'm not really sure. But yeah, we see her in the trailer, and it looks like she is temporarily part of X Factor because maybe, again, the memory got lost, but we're not really sure. We'll have to wait and see. We also know in the trailer that Wolverine is aligned with Morph again, and aligned with Lady Deathstrike. So that's kind of interesting. And of course, we know that Wolverine and Lady Deathstrike, Unico, if you will, have a past and everything. They have a history. And we're going to have to see if that plays out, comes to the forefront, or if maybe what happened caused all the memories to be, temporarily changed due to the aftermath of season 1. We'll have to see. But yeah, it's going to be quite interesting as to what they do. But like I said, the way people have been reporting it and assuming from what they can tell, just based off the trailer and based off the images and everything, that it's going to be a fight against Apocalypse across 3 different timelines. The past where his origin of how he became who he is, the present, and then the future. And it kind of gives off that vibe in the trailer, I will say that. So that's why they're kind of talking about when it comes to romance, you have Rogue and Magneto in the past, you have Jean, you have Jean and Scott, Cyclops and, Phoenix, if you will, Phoenix Jean Grey, in the future, and then you have Storm and Forge possibly joining them in the future, kind of looking for them, or basically, still in the present, like I said, getting ready to fight against Apocalypse. And again, it's going to be a fight against him across all 3 different timelines, and we can assume that this is going to play into how Cable becomes obsessed with Apocalypse, because here's the thing. In the original series, it is kind of touched upon. It is kind of touched upon in, I think, the earlier seasons. When Jean kind of stops Cyclops from injuring Cable or doing something, with Cable, and she's basically telling him that he means more to the future, than they can ever imagine. Basically hinting at the fact that, that's their child. That's their child. They just, they basically Cyclops doesn't know it, and for any of us that were watching X-Men, discovering X-Men, for the first time, not by reading, basically in animation form, I should say, not by, reading the comics. Basically, we're not aware of that. So what we have to do is what we had to do basically go read the comics, and everything, or ask around and find out. Oh, Cable's a kid. But it's not really fully mentioned in the OG series. It's not fully acknowledged in the original series, like it has been lately with the '97 continuation. But anyway, basically, yeah, we're probably going to see season 2 kind of serve, as basically the origins of how Cable becomes, pretty much obsessed with Apocalypse. He's going to become obsessed with Apocalypse, and that's why we will see him fighting and hunting him down in the future, if you will, like we did in the OG series. So I think we're going to get the origins of that happening, and then that's going to explain basically, why we saw him saw him obsessed, or be so obsessed over taking out Apocalypse. So that's what we can assume. That's what we can assume. But yeah, they do they do allude to, like I said, there's going to be romance that's going to span across 3 timelines. The one that was teased, surprisingly, basically taken from the comics, and that being Rogue and Magneto. And then, of course, excuse me. Then, of course, you have Jean and Cyclops, and then you have Storm and Forge, and then, of course, what they don't mention is you have Jubilee and Sunspot, and maybe even Iceman and Kitty Pryde. Because I think they're going to want to touch upon that one as well when it happens. But yeah, it's really interesting. And of course, you got Havoc coming back, other characters coming back as well as Polaris. Um, Laura, I think that's Lorna. I think that's her name, Lorna. You have Polaris coming in, as part of X Factor, so they're going to touch upon that as well. And you're probably going to have that interaction, that awkwardness between Havoc, Iceman, Bobby Drake, and Lorna. So that's going to be interesting. But overall, yeah, overall, they're making season 2 definitely something we have to see, something that we definitely have to keep our eye on going into next season, or next year. Yeah, next season, next year is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. I'm just walking around recording this, but also looking outside to see what's going on and everything, because I'm always told keep an eye out on what's going on outside and everything, because you never know. But anyway, though, that's pretty much what's going on with the X-Men news. But again, just to go over it, you have the Ross guy. You have the guy that voices Apocalypse and Charles Xavier. He's pretty much saying that he was kind of surprised and shocked that Disney greenlit season 2 because it's very, very dark and a lot of people die. And they're kind of surprised that Disney would say okay to that, because this is Disney, and even though they have allowed more edgy or darker stuff in the past and in the present, this is something that even they feel, being, like I said, one of the main voices, for two of the main characters going into the next season, for them to come out and say, yeah, I'm kind of surprised they let this pass and everything. That is, that, like I said earlier, that's something you should take into consideration very seriously. Now, again, for them to say that we're going to have a lot of we're going to have romance as well with, Magneto, Rogue, Cyclops, Jean, Forge, and Storm, and maybe more like Sunspot and Jubilee, Shadowcat, Iceman, Havoc, Polaris. It's going to be interesting. If you're a sucker for that kind of soap opera stuff, when it comes to X-Men, you're going to be in for a treat. There's no doubt. You're going to be in for a treat, and I'm looking forward to it. Myself. I'm looking forward to it myself. And then, of course, the news. The news that from Brad Winderburn himself, that they are currently discussing X-Men 97 and X-Men 97 season 4 and 5, with plans for new seasons to drop every year starting next year. So like I mentioned earlier, the way things are being planned out, that they're trying to hopefully make a reality, is 2026 will have season 2, 2027 will have season 3, 2028 will have season 4, and 2029 will have season 5. So we can assume that, not mentioning in season 6 unless they want to do that, season 5 will be where they wrap it up before we enter the 2030s. So the 2030s will basically be like a start, a new fresh start for the X-Men overall. And 2029, if they're not going to do a 6th season, will basically be the conclusion of the overall soft continuation of the OG series. So again, that's interesting to see. That's interesting to really enjoy. And then, of course, they have the release schedule as well, basically giving the progress report of what's going on. So again, summer of next year will be season 2. The animatics are underway right now currently. The animatics are underway right now currently for season 3. And then in early development is season 4 and 5. So again, it's going to be really interesting. And then, like I said, you have you have Ross. Can't think of his last name right now. But you have the guy that voices Charles Xavier in Apocalypse next year, coming out and saying he was quite taken aback by Disney saying, "Okay, go ahead. You got our blessing to go and do what you got to do with X-Men 97 season 2." Again, like I said, to hear him say, that he was shocked, he was surprised because of how dark and maybe even graphic it could be, is something you need to pay attention to. But now the obvious question that a lot of people have is what's going to happen in the upcoming seasons? We know that season 2 is going to be very apocalypse based. And then, as pretty much a lot of people are suspecting, it's going to be a fight all across time against Apocalypse to prevent him from, getting it, to prevent him basically from gaining power, to getting to where he is in the present, as well as to, basically succeeding in the future. So it's going to be, basically, like I say, a battle across time. It's going to be interesting to see how they make that work and how that gets all the characters together. We do know that Gambit, who died in season 1, is going to be hinted as being resurrected by Apocalypse as his new horseman, his new death horseman, if you will. We know that's going to be interesting, especially when he has to interact with Rogue. Because Apocalypse is going to send him to the past to go after them. You know that. And we can only predict that if it goes by what the comics have done, that Rogue's going to be what kind of snaps him out of it and gets him back to being Gambit. But now he's kind of in this death form, and that maybe going back in time and preventing him from dying will kind of kind of change him back, or at least erase this version of Gambit and keep that version of Gambit alive, or something like that. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Again, the other noteworthy thing here is, them saying that a lot of people are going to die. And again, this is coming from the guy that voices Apocalypse and Charles Xavier. And you got to wonder what characters they're going to kill off, even if it's just like a temporary deal for the story. Because if it's the kind of story, time travel wise, that they're going for, then these deaths are only going to be temporary, and they'll pretty much get resolved, and undone at the end. You kind of see that coming. You kind of feel that's coming. But you have to wonder who they're looking at. Could some of the characters listed, that are supposed to be, featured or being planned to be featured in season 2, could some of them be on pretty much, the hit list or the target list of dark magics, if you will. Ariana, Colossus's sister, is she one to go bye bye? She done. Is Colossus going to join her? Colossus, bye bye. Could that be it? We don't know. We don't know. But it's going to be interesting, and you have to wonder how long we're going to keep this Apocalypse storyline going, because if they're already planning to release season 3 in 2027, and the animatics are already underway for that, you got to wonder if they're going to basically make this one of the longer story arcs, one of the longer sagas, because of who's involved. Who's involved. Now we do know, even though they didn't outright say it, we do know that they plan to do a weekly release like they did last year. So every week in the summer, whether it's in June or July, whenever they plan to release this, we know it's going to be every week. And a lot of people, obviously at midnight or the next day, are going to be watching the episodes. They're going to be tuning it in and watching it to see what happens next. So we know that's going to potentially be the direction they go. They go the weekly route. But like I said, but the reason I bring that up and everything is because if they're going to make this Apocalypse thing maybe span across 2 seasons, that makes a lot of sense. Because let's say it's 13 episodes, right? We're not sure. It could be 13, it could be less. But if they get to a certain point to where season 2 ends on a cliffhanger that builds into season 3, then it would make all this. Then it obviously will add everything. It'll add everything up to make us kind of understand why they want to try to go the yearly release. The yearly release for each season, so that way we don't have to wait too long, and then they can get one story out of the way and then focus on the next story. And then of course that does bring us to potentially what season 4 and 5 will be, because if they do stretch the Apocalypse thing out to season 3, it basically takes up 2 seasons, season 2 and 3. If they do that, you got to look at season 4 and 5. And you got to wonder, okay, what would they do for season 4 and 5? What's going to be different? What could they adapt? And there's a lot of stuff they can adapt. There really is. There's really a lot of stuff they could potentially adapt, storyline wise in season 4 and 5. You got the House of M they could potentially do. I mean, they kind of did that in the Dark Phoenix, in the adaptation of the Dark Phoenix in the OG series, but not like a straight out adaptation. So you got that you could do and everything. You got some of the news stories they're working on right now, like the Shadows of Tomorrow. That could be something they could adapt potentially. They could, go to a tried and true and do I wouldn't say redo the Phoenix thing, but kind of, acknowledge that the Phoenix Force still resides within Jean, even though we saw it kind of be like, oh, what remained of it kind of leave her, towards, at the end of season 1, we can find out that it still resides in her. Like, even though, this part of the Phoenix is gone and that part of the Phoenix is gone, that there's a little part within her, that could potentially be what happens. We don't know. There's some stories that might be very controversial that they could do. Like, there is that one story arc where you have basically, I don't know if I'll put it up here in an image, but there's this one story arc they did that basically one of the issues ended and the next issue continued off from, if you will. The one issue ended and the other issue continued off from, where you have basically, characters like Jubilee and other mutants at the school, at Xavier's school, pretty much on crosses. Now, I don't think they'd be able to do the cross thing, if you will. I don't think they'd be able to do that, in an adaptation, but they could work around it to where maybe it's X's. Because we know that when it comes to certain stories that are adapted into animation or anime, like let's say Yu-Gi-Oh! For American audiences, we do know that basically sometimes image-wise they got to change things up. Like in one of the season 1 episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh, in the original adaptation in Japan, Kaiba, and I think this is when they first did the Cyber World thing. Kaiba was hooked up, onto a stone slab that looked like a cross, or at least resembled that. So what did they do in the dubbed version? They basically edited that to where it looked like more just like a slab of rock that he was hooked up to, not a cross. So, they could basically do something like that. That, instead of doing it straight up crosses like we saw in that, at the end of one issue and going into the next. Instead, they could have it like X's, and there is an image out there where the characters are, on X-like fixtures. So we could see that if they want to adapt that storyline. But there is a lot. There's a lot they can do. There's no doubt. There is definitely, a lot they can do. We know that, with season 2 and 3, there's a good chance maybe, season 3, like I said, if they stretch this out, will pretty much be, the age of apocalypse. If they stretch out this storyline and everything, that this could be, season 2 could be the build-up, and then season 3 could be, the age of apocalypse storyline. That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. But then again, they do like to adapt certain story arcs and everything, even, as short as they might be. They like to adapt certain story arcs into the season. We saw that last year. But, I think honestly, this is an opportunity for them to really not just maybe adapt or slowly integrate certain story arcs into the main plot, but also use it to build to season 3, which I believe, if they do what I think they're going to do, will be the Age of Apocalypse storyline. That's what I think. I think we're going to see the beginnings of it in season 2, and potentially, if they go the route I think they're going to go, season 3 will be the Age of Apocalypse storyline, pretty much, from beginning to end. That's what I'm thinking. From beginning to end. That's what I'm thinking. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see what they do. And I know that people are thinking, well, what if they don't do it? What if it's all just a straight shot in season 2? Well, if it's a straight shot in season 2, and they're going to have 13 episodes at most, I think, to do it in. But if it is a straight shot, then, like I said, season 4 and 5, they have a lot of stories they can work with. House of M, they could work with. Like I said, they could do that one where pretty much, you get that iconic scene of all the young mutants at the school, being crucified on crosses, or in this case could be X like structures. You got that. You got other ones as well, if you will. You got other ones as well that that they could do. I think you have story arcs where I think you have Cyclops. He kind of gets possessed. He kind of becomes like a villain. So you could do that in season 4 or 5. There's a lot of there's a lot of like I said, different stories that they could adapt for season 4 and 5. There's a lot they could do. And if they don't go the route, like I said, for season 3, well, basically season 3 is just a continuation, I should say, of season 2, and it's the Age of Apocalypse deal, then I could see them using season 3 for something else. I could. I could see them. In fact, I could see them, if I'm right about this, I could see them using that for another story arc. In fact, let me see if I can look it up. Hold on for a second, guys. Like I said, you can do. I was just looking some up. You can do one on Revolution. I don't know if that was an arc. You could do one on that. You can even do a take on the Extreme X-Men comic series. Yeah, and let me explain. You don't have to make it like we're just going to dedicate certain episodes to Extreme X-Men and hope that is enough to convince them to do a separate series. No, you can do an Extreme X-Men adaptation. Like basically come up with a story, if you will, at least, or maybe connect the stories because they do connect. If you will, you connect the stories, and you can call it the Extreme X-Men saga. That could work. Heck, you can even take the X-Men, and even though we saw it in the MCU, we have yet to see it in animation form. You can do the Infinity Gauntlet, and you could use the X-Men series, in like season 3. Again, if you don't do Age of Apocalypse and everything, which I think they will for season 3, because I think season 2 is the setup, and season 3 is pretty much going to be from beginning to end. That it's going to be that story. But if they don't, then I can see them using season 3 to do the Infinity Gauntlet. I can see them using season 3 to do a variety of stories, like the Extreme X-Men situation. Do a take on that, if you will. You can use season 3, like I said, if it's not going to be Age of Apocalypse, you could use it as a team up one. You could use it to do adaptations of stories like with the X-Men teaming up with Ghost Rider, the X-Men teaming up with Daredevil. We hear that Spider-Man, the '90s Spider-Man, the one that crossed over with the X-Men in his own series, and then we saw a glimpse of him and Mary Jane in the final episode, at least one of the final episodes of season 1. Reports are now he's going to be coming in. He's going to be jumping into the fray. So if you're going to do that in season 2, then it makes sense you could probably do something like that even more so in season 3 if you're not going to continue the Apocalypse storyline, which again, I firmly believe they're going to do. I look at season 2 being described the way it was as a setup to what season 3 will be, and season 3 is going to be Age of Apocalypse. I feel it. I just feel that's what's going to happen. And then, like I said, season 4 and 5, you have a lot of ideas, like I just mentioned, for potential season 3 if they don't do Age of Apocalypse. They can do some of these stories, in season 4 and 5, like the one I mentioned with the mutants, the young mutants being hung up on these fixtures, almost crucifix style, but you can't do it the way they originally did it and described in the comic. You'd have to do it with X structures or something. I could see that, being adapted. Like I said, I could see the Revolution tale being adapted. I can see, Infinity Gauntlet for season 4, maybe season 5 being adapted. And mostly, I can see this, and I have a trade paperback of it, if you will. I have a trade paperback of it. I could see them adapting Phoenix End Song, because I mentioned earlier, even though it looks like Jean doesn't have the Phoenix in her anymore, you can't tell me that the part of that is not residing still within her. We thought, the Phoenix was out of her before, right? Like, at the end of Dark Phoenix, the animated adaptation, we thought it was out of her, and the Phoenix gave them the advice of, hey, just take a piece of your souls and your life force to resurrect Jean, and it did, and all that, and it did do that. But But honestly, though, we thought that was it, right? And then, of course, we saw what happened in season one with pretty much the Phoenix being revealed that, hey, part of it still resides within her. So who's to say part of it still doesn't reside within her? Because I think it does. And if you do that, you can definitely have the keys to adapt several Phoenix-related stories for 4 and 5. And I think End Song would be a perfect adaptation. I've read End Song, and I loved it. I loved End Song, so I think you do that, it'll be a great adaptation going forward. I really do. And especially what could be looked at as the final seasons of X-Men '97, that being 4 and 5. But yeah, that's just my opinion of what I think they could potentially look into for the fourth and fifth season. Now, like I said, my belief is season two. We're getting introduced to Apocalypse, or reintroduced to Apocalypse in the past, present, and the future, right? So it makes sense to me that this is going to be a setup, to season three, which will be the Age of Apocalypse. That's what I think is going to happen. I think we're being set up, with these 13 episodes, season two. At least that's what we think it's what's going to be. I think it's supposed to be 13 episodes. Let me know, guys, in the comment section if not. And in the live chat, if you guys haven't done that already, I do apologize, but help me out in the live chat as well. Super chats are open if you want to do that. But anyway, like I said, again, we're being introduced or reintroduced to him across all the time frames that you have the characters in. You have the characters scattered, throughout. So it makes sense in my opinion, that season two is just going to be the setup to season three being Age of Apocalypse. Now, if it's not, then like I said, they can use season three to adapt some of the stories I mentioned. If not, just use it as a team-up season to bring in other Marvel characters, if you know what I mean. If not, other factions as well, other Marvel superhero groups as well, to team up with them. But we'll see. We'll see what they do, but it's definitely got me interested. It's got me interested to want to see season two. Season one I thought was great, and I can't wait to see what season two's got to offer, continuing off from that. But again, my prediction in closing is this. That we're looking at season two as the setup, and as the setup to season three, and season three being basically the be all end all to the Apocalypse deal, because that's going to be the Age of Apocalypse. Season two is going to be the setup to it, and then season three is going to be the Age of Apocalypse storyline from beginning to end. That's just my opinion. And then I think with season 4 and 5, you open the door for other adaptations of stories you could do. Like I said, you could do a take on all the storylines, combine them all into one, and call it the Extreme X-Men season, basically taking place within the X-Men '97 continuity. It's just an adaptation, kind of a loose adaptation, where you're basically utilizing some of the stories and some of the moments and stuff in those stories as well for season 4, maybe 5. And then I can also see story arcs like Revolution. I can see story arcs like the Infinity Gauntlet, and I can see story arcs like Phoenix End Song to basically wrap things up, if you will, in one of them, if not both seasons. That's just my opinion. Because right now they're discussing what X-Men '97 is going to be in those seasons, and these are some of the ideas I think hopefully they're going over, if not more, as we speak. And there's some stories that I know of, I just can't think of the name of, there's some story arcs and everything that I think they'll be able to bring to the forefront for the series, for those seasons. But we'll see. But those are just my ideas. But in closing, guys, that's all I'm going to say. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to X-Men '97 Season 2 and what's going to happen there, as well as I'm looking forward to what they got planned for Season 3 in 2027, as well as what they're thinking about adapting, loosely, in their own way for Season 4 and 5. And again, in closing, I think, I know I'm repeating myself here, but I do believe Season 2 is the setup, to the Age of Apocalypse storyline, which will take place in Season 3, and then that opens the door for Season 4 to 5 to, for them to do what they got to do, adapt whatever they want to adapt, maybe some of the ideas, story arcs that I mentioned they could potentially do. Also, the fact that the news going out there that Rogue is getting a new solo comic in January next year, which again pretty much in my opinion, closes the door, closes the discussion on what her future is going to be. She's going to be with the X-Men, and this is going to be a great another take on her story. I'm looking forward to it. And then, of course, we have the we have the discussion for the MCU of Rogue being part of Avengers Doomsday. Don't know who's going to portray her. Whether it's going to be Annie Paquin, the one that the girl that portrayed her before. We don't know if it's going to be her. She's saying, there's reports right now that saying it's not going to be her, but sometimes those reports are to throw us off. So Annie Paquin might be her, or might be in it. They just don't want us to know right now. So we'll have to see. But yeah, there's reports on that too, as well as there are reports that the next saga, for the MCU, which takes place obviously after Secret Wars, is going to be not just X-Men focused and based, but the main primary antagonist villains for that saga, which would be building up to the next Avengers, if not X-Men Avengers team up, is going to be Sinister and Apocalypse. I think they're going to save Apocalypse, as the big bad, just like they did with Thanos. So we'll see what happens, but let me know what your thoughts are, guys, in the comment section down below. And do me a solid favor, like the video, ring the bell for notifications, subscribe to the channel, also share the video, guys, and also click on the links in the description to find my content elsewhere. For content you can't, click on the links in the, I'm getting a little tongue-tied here, guys. I've been doing this for over 40 minutes. But click on the links in the description to find my content elsewhere outside of YouTube, as well as click on the top link to go to my fourth wall store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else. I have one thing up there right now, but there will be more coming in the future. And also, guys, click on the bottom link at the Teespring to go to my OG Teespring store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else. I think you will enjoy what you see in both areas. Also, support me over at patreon.com at BWRoses. Also, check me out at Venmo and Cash App as well. Be greatly appreciated if you can find me there, as well as find me at all your favorite audio video podcast affiliates like Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, Pandora, to an extent Sirius XM, as well as Radio Public. And any place there's a podcast, you will find me there, like Audible as well. But guys, let me know what your thoughts are on what I had to say. Comment down below. And until next time, I will talk to you all later. God bless. Take care. I'm going to get me some lunch.